Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest in our webinar series. And this time we're concentrating on B2B marketing with Sitecore. And the reason we're doing this, and the reason we thought it would be interesting to share, and you may have seen a couple of my LinkedIn updates and blog posts and so on recently, is that we've started to see quite a lot of results by leveraging some of the marketing features within Sitecore. And we're going to look at some of those today. It should be quite interesting. I think some of you on the call we've spoken to before, others we haven't, but I think a lot of this is going to be relevant from what we know about you and your sectors. So just a very quick overview, a reminder of what we're going to be talking about. So how we're going to target prospects, customers and segments. Foolishly or not, I'm going to try and do a live demo around this so you can see how this is all set up in the back end of Sitecore. We're going to look at identifying individuals for one-to-one conversations. So not just targeting customers and segments, but also looking at how we start to know who the individual user is so we can market to them more effectively. Integrating with existing platforms and sharing data. So how do we take into account things like CRMs, email platforms, automation platforms, and so on. Creating engaging content journeys, and I've got an example of this I'm going to show you in terms of how you might want to think about developing these journeys. And then finally, extracting business intelligence for your sales team. So how do we get data out of the platform and get it to the people who need it? And often that's the bit that's missed from a lot of these types of projects. But just to begin with, we're going to have a look at targeting prospects, customers and segments. So why do this? It's fairly new. Some of you may be familiar with things like lead forensics, where you can see who's visited your site, and you may be aware that Sitecore offers something similar as well. They called it the Sitecore GeoIP service. It used to be called MaxMind. But we can also do a lot of things within Sitecore to target those individuals and those customers and those companies more effectively as well. But why do it? We can serve relevant messaging from the first hit, so the first time the user visits our site, we can instantly be relevant to them, their sector, even down to individual company or even the individual itself. Quickly direct users to content that's right for them. So if you're an organization that has lots of different types of services and sectors, so legal sector is a good example where they've got potentially 10 plus different disciplines or sectors they deal with, how do you quickly get people to the right content? Creating trust, again, through the relevant messaging. So from first hit, they can see that you provide the kind of service and product that they're looking for. Managing lists of customers easily. So if you've ever played around with the rules engine in Sitecore, you'll be aware that it's okay, but it can be clunky. And when you get into the realms of trying to target a lot of different types of customers, or if you are trying to target lots of different segments, then it can be quite unwieldy, especially when you get into the sort of sphere of having 10, 20 rules set up in a homepage banner, trying to target lots of different people at the same time. So we'll have a look at that as well. And then using those lists to roll out long-term scalable personalization. This will become a bit more clear as I go through the presentation. And finally, why are we doing it? Well, obviously to increase sales leads, but also from an existing customer point of view, we're trying to increase the share of wallet as well. So we're trying to maximize the conversation, the interaction we're having with our existing customers to try and increase our repeat business. So I'm going to launch into a quick demo, first of all, to show you what I mean by targeting customers. So if I bring up our own site, I'm going to do this today all on our Ratio Partner site, and we've got some of this actually set up ourselves. So if you come from certain types of sectors or certain companies and you come to our homepage, you won't see what we're looking at here, which is our sort of standard messaging on the homepage. What you'll see is messaging that's relevant to the legal sector or the membership sector or a couple of others that we've got set up in there. But this is all predicated on having Sitecore's GeoIP service set up. Now, you might think that Sitecore's GeoIP service is just used for location tracking. Well, it's not just that. It's also used for tracking business names as well. And you can find this in a couple of places. You've probably heard of the experience profile. There is some data in there, but I find it quite a limited view of our customers. It only provides you with a certain amount of information. Where I prefer to look is actually in the old analytics report, which is hidden within this icon in the old Sitecore desktop. I'm on Sitecore 8.2, by the way, and this is also available in previous versions. So if I just zip into here, if you want the link to this, by the way, we can send it to you after the webinar, but I'm just going to go into the old analytics report and just quickly show you what I mean by GeoIP. And you can have a look at this yourself if you're unsure whether you've actually got this switched on, because you have to buy credits for it from Sitecore. If it's not switched on, you will see all these sessions. These are all user sessions on our site, same as you would see in things like Google Analytics. These will all be NA, as in not applicable. So have a look. If it says NA, the chances are you haven't bought Sitecore GeoIP credits. It's really cheap to buy those. You're talking, I think we pay for about 20,000 every year. I think it costs us about £15. So it's very, very cheap to buy. But what we're looking at here is a list of all the organisations and sessions rather that have taken place on our site. And you can see next to each session we've got the organisation name. In fact, we've got one here, I think, from one of the people who's on the webinar today. So if you have a look down here, this will tell you, and this is what we're going to be looking at when we're setting up rules to target these users and segments within Sitecore. So if I go back, I'm going to go back to the Experience Editor. I'm going to show you just a very quick sort of phase one, something we try maybe as part of a campaign, usually for some B2B customers, where we're promoting a product or service that's only relevant to a certain subset of the users that we're targeting. So I'm going to do this in Experience Editor just because it's easier to show. You can also do it through Content Editor as well. If I click on here, you can see we've got our floating toolbar, which you're probably familiar with. And I'm going to open up the Personalization Rules Editor. We'll come back to these rules that I've got set up here in a second. But we're going to set up something that's just targeting one of our own clients, which is HSBC. And we're going to say if HSBC comes to our site, we want to show them a particular type of content. So I've got a few banners set up in the back end. I'll just pick one. There we go. So we're going to say if the user coming to the site contains, in this case, HSBC, just to pick an example, then we want to show them a particular type of content. So I'm just going to go and pick up a dummy banner that I've set up here earlier. So here's our list of carousels that we've got on the home page at the moment. I'm going to press OK, just save that, and then within our preview we can go and have a look. There's our rule there, and it's going to, I think I've put something in here about agencies, not banks, but we'll see it showing anyway. So if I preview that, you can see, hello Ratio, find out how we can help agencies like you. So I could have actually put HSBC in here, but you get the idea. What we're doing is when a user's coming to our site, we're looking at their IP range via the GeoIP lookup service. And if we recognize it as being from HSBC's IP range, we can show them this message here. Sorry for the slightly confusing messaging. I've actually changed what I was going to do with this a couple of hours ago. But you get the idea. So that's how you would do it for one customer. But you can see what I mean. If you're going to set this up as a campaign, you're going to try and target 50 different types of companies, you have to set up that business rule for 50 different company names. As you can imagine, and as we've been through the pain of in our early days, that takes quite a long time. So there's actually a better way to do this. And this is something to think about when you're starting off with personalization as to who are these target lists going to be. And how do we want to target them? Because we can do it not only on the home page, but we can do it within these subsections of the home page, these blocks underneath here. We can do it on other pages within the site. So you can see that it quickly becomes quite exponential. The minute we're setting up these 50 rules for the 50 different types of businesses on 4 areas on 50 pages, suddenly we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rules to try and maintain. So what we can do instead is use the list editor in the marketing control panel. And it's hidden away in a slightly strange place. If I'll show you quickly in here, if I go into System, Marketing Control Panel, and go into Personalization, you can see, and you'll have this as well, you can see you've got something here called Predefined Rules. And within here, we can set up groups of companies that we want to target. So you can see here, I've got a couple set up on the Ratio site. So visitor is legal, for example, and you can see that we've set up these companies all within this section here. The idea being that rather than having to add all these different companies as individual personalization rules, all we have to do, if I go back to the Experience Editor, and if I just show you the Personalization Rules Editor again, you can see that we can set up entire rules where we just say where visitor is legal, and that's all we've done. We've chosen the banner, and now that's going to be served to about 25 different customers visiting our site. So you can see this is a really nice way of making this whole process a lot more manageable for you, and it gets away from having a rules engine which is quite complex. So we've only got 2 rules here, but actually we're targeting about 50 different experiences using it. And then we can use these groups, and we can apply them elsewhere on the site as well. So on your contact form page, you might want to have different types of imagery, for example, based on the kind of sector or the kind of company that is that's viewing the site. So that's the first thing I want to cover. I just want to duck back into the presentation again. A question we often get asked around this stuff, and we'll talk a bit more about the Visit 2, Visit 3 a bit later, because that's more around content journeys. This is actually a screenshot from a live client. I've redacted their name on the test items here. But you can see that we've set up goals and page events around the site, and what we're doing is we're measuring what's happening when a user clicks through from a personalized banner versus someone who's seen the generic experience. And we can see that on the right hand side, here's a list of some of the banks we're targeting through this this company. This is a bit of a campaign one, so we did a very quick and dirty line by line rules thing here. But you can see that there's been a sort of 320% increase in engagement from users who are coming into the site. They're seeing that banner straight away, and we can even see down here the amount of people that have been reached as well, and this is out of about 20,000 visits in a month, I think, by memory. So there is an impact, and what we're looking at here is the personalization rules engine, testing engine. So you can get to this through the experience editor, but you can see that we're seeing an uplift in the top 50 accounts. We're also seeing a slight uplift in some of our content journey, and this tends to change a little bit as well, but we can also see where perhaps there's a negative impact, and we can use that data to start adjusting the messaging that we're putting on some of those homepage banners or those panels that we've got elsewhere on the site. So the answer is yes, it does work. Does it translate through to leads? Yes, it does, but it's quite easily measurable through here as well. And if we wanted to, we could pull out bespoke reports. So we could say which personalization rule has an impact on a specific goal. That's not currently built into the product, but it's something, the data's there. All we need to do is create a bespoke report to surface that for you. So moving on, looking at identifying individuals. So what I've just spoken about is often phase 1 for customers. The next phase is, okay, now we know these users are visiting our site, and we'll come on to reporting a bit later on. But what our sales teams really want to know is who those users are once we've started personalizing to them. So once we've shown engagement, how can we identify exactly who they are? So how can we do it? So when they provided us with the information in the past through a contact form, I'm going to come on to that in a second. The only one I'm not going to cover off during this because of time is the email campaign link. We can actually use email tokens. So if you're sending out an email campaign, we can use ID or name tokens to recognize people incoming from that as well, and then write it to the Sitecore contact record. We can also do it from the form provider, which I'll cover in a second, and through integration with forensics and lead forensics and big data, sales lead technologies like that, again, which I'll show you now. So how do we identify them through a form? And this is one of the big challenges, is when you don't have much form capture on your site, or any kind of data capture really, not even an email subscription. It's very difficult to track who users are, because the way that Sitecore tracks users, it can only do that, and it can only marry up all the historical records of a user if it has a unique identifier such as an email address. If we don't have that email address, it makes it very difficult for us to know who they are, and we can only do things anonymously with them. We might be able to know who their business name are, but we don't know who they are individually. So for example, here we've got downloading a white paper, where we're giving away a white paper just as a simple PDF download without requesting any value exchange. So what we're going to end up with is what we see on the right, which is a drill down into that report I showed you earlier. And what this is showing is that we've got a report, because they've come to the site, but we've got no idea who they are because it's anonymous. So one of the things we try to do is look at where we can intelligently put some data capture in. So rather than just giving away things, how do we capture a little bit of data, even if it's just first name, last name, email address, as we've got here. And I know a lot of customers have concerns about putting things like this in the way of white paper downloads. My personal view is, what's the trade-off? Would you rather just have 1,000 people downloading, your white paper but no idea who they are, no way of following up with them, or would you rather have 500 quality leads that you can pass to the sales team and actively do follow up and nurture with? So it's not all about the numbers, it's also about the quality. The other challenge we sometimes see is that forms within the site are actually not provided by Sitecore, or not provided by a bespoke Sitecore built form. But rather it's either iframed in or JavaScripted in from things like Marketo. So when a user fills this in, the data is not being stored in Sitecore, it's going straight over to Marketo or Eloqua. This presents a problem because it means that we don't actually store this data in Sitecore, which means that it's quite difficult for us to, again, identify who those individual users are if we want to personalize to them or do clever things with them in the future. There are ways around this. Ideally, you wouldn't actually do this at all. You would store the data as it's supposed to be in Sitecore, and then you would fire it out to Marketo and Eloqua. But we understand that we have different tools in place and different ways of working, and there's always budget and so on. And it's a very cheap way of doing it. What we can do, though, is we can take calls back from things like Marketo and Eloqua. So when that form's submitted, it's sent to Marketo, for example, and then Marketo will fire back a call to Sitecore to say, thanks for sending us that information, here's all the details that we've got. And then Sitecore can write that to the user's session ID, and then we've got a complete record. So even though there's two separate systems in play here, we can still have a knowledge of who the user is. The other thing when you want to get slightly cleverer, and this does solve certain challenges, is where we've got things like lead forensics, where we've got Telium, so whether it's off our estate or on our estate but not necessarily on Sitecore, whether we're looking at interaction with Salesforce or display ads and so on, where we've got big data, we can start to do clever things with that as well. So if a user comes to our site and they're anonymous, we can still have tags running on there from these kind of providers, and we can pass that data off to them and say, we've got this user, do you know who they are? And they can come back and say, oh yes, we know it's so-and-so, here's their email address. So we're storing that in lead forensics. They've got a massive database, so if a lead forensics customer has been on a different type of site, for example, that's also got a lead forensics tags, they're storing all this data in a massive database, and they can tell us who that user is. Same with Telium as well. Telium has an attribute within it called email that we can track users with if they've submitted a form somewhere that's got Telium tags. And again, we can send this back into Sitecore and we can add it to the contact record. So even though we don't actually know who the user is, we can still, if you like, know who the user is based on things like tagging and yeah, big data. So some interesting examples there. I'm just going to move on now to engaging content journeys, and this is something we've always been quite a big proponent of, looking at things like how do we target return visitors, how do we target them based on engagement score, lead score, and so on. And we've actually done some of this as well, and some of that testing result you saw earlier was off the back of that. What do we think an engaging content journey consists of? Well, it's relevant from the first visit, so we don't have to wait until we know something about them. We can still do things like, GeoIP targeting or segment-based targeting like we just saw. What can we do on their first visit to get them into that funnel, if that's what we're trying to do, as quickly and as simply as possible? Making it relevant to previous behavior and activity as well. So based on what we know about them, so goals triggered, events triggered, profiles matched, and so on. How do we tell a story to them based on their journey stage? So first visit, second visit, third visit, what have they been looking at? What goals have they triggered? What have they interacted with? What's going to be the next best story to tell them? Something that instills trust and confidence, and a big part of that is often in the B2B space. Here's other customers like you who are using our products and service, and here's the success that they're seeing. So it's often peer-based, it's often case study-based, again, targeting customers with that relevant information. And then finally, trying to drive people back into the funnel or into the funnel in the first place. So we've got these different things we can do to create a journey around. And if you've ever played around with the rules engine in Sitecore, you'll be aware that you've got about 100 rules out of the box. So you can create these journeys around a whole bunch of different things. But what I wanted to do is show you a quick example, which is based on a recent project that we've done. I'm just going to use the ratio site to kind of mock it up a little bit. But here we're looking at the ratio default homepage. So many of you on the call will, if you come to our site, you'll just see this. Some of you may see the more personalized messaging. But what we're going to do is have a look at an example where we might want to target someone like HSBC to come back to them again. So looking at, okay, on first hit, we're going to serve them information about, okay, here's how we help banking customers achieve success. So it's our first hit, trying to be relevant. We don't know much about them, exactly what they're interested in yet, but what can we do to try and make things more relevant? So that's first hit. But then we want to look at what journey we're going to take them on afterwards, and this is where it gets quite interesting. So you have that first visit, they might be served that banner that we just saw. They then go and click through to the content that we want them to consume. So in our case, it might be something like blog posts around banking. It might be how we support banking through personalization. And they'll be looking around there, but they don't actually convert and they go away. Well, at that point, we still know quite a bit about them. So we know the user is from HSBC. We know it's their first visit in this case. We know that they've engaged with a particular type of content. And we know that they haven't converted. And that sort of converted, not converted piece is quite a useful bit of information, because it means we can then start nurturing a user based on what they have or haven't done. So if we look at what we're going to take them next time, we want to say, okay, the visitor comes back to the site. We've got a banner promoting the white paper. So going back to that idea of peer-based content. So how can we show you something about how banking is, personalization is supporting growth in banking and direct them towards a white paper and get them to click through, and then going back to that theory about getting someone to do a value exchange, give us their email and then download the white paper and then try and get them back to conversion. If they still haven't converted, we'll have a look at what we can do then. So here's our new personalized banner. So this is their second visit. We know they're interested now. We're just trying to drive into that peer-related content. We sent them to it. We've got our form there set up, and we've got our goal running in the back end of Sitecore for a white paper download. So now we know they're highly engaged, and we've potentially got some lead scoring sat behind this goal as well. So we can put it out into a report that I'm going to show you a bit later. So now we've got an identified user. So we can start to do a bit more with that kind of user. In this case, it's proactively pulling the user back into the funnel. And we can do that using Sitecore's marketing automation engine, or potentially we could use another automation engine you've got in place, such as Sitecore. But we can put them into an engagement plan within Sitecore, within its own engine, and we can say if the user has downloaded a white paper but not hit the contact form, then we want to put them into an engagement plan that engages them with an email to come back to the site and contact us. So we create a very, very simple two-step plan, and then we send an email out to the user, and we have logic around this perhaps, so we might want to send 2 or 3 emails, we might want to limit it to a number of emails or a period of time, we might only want to send these emails at a particular time as well. But the idea is we can try and drag people back into the site now that we know who they are, now we've identified them. And the last bit I'm going to talk about today, I've got about 7 minutes I think on the main presentation, is the other piece which I mentioned at the beginning, which is this is all well and good, but how do we actually extract business intelligence that's going to be useful for the people who are going to be using it? And often cases, or most cases, that's actually the sales team. So they've got no access to Sitecore. Marketing has limited capacity to start manipulating and extracting all this data. So what can we do to get this data to the sales team so that they can start identifying who's been on the site, who's interested in what, who's got a high lead score, and so on. So we can do things like CRM integration. This is a slide that we put into some of our presentations. You may have seen it before. An example of Salesforce and Sitecore. So whereas in someone like a CRM like Dynamics or Salesforce, we have the concept of accounts, we have individuals, we have activities such as calls that have been made, we've potentially got things like lead scores, we've got deals all sat within there. We can enrich all of that data with what we're storing within Sitecore as well. So everything I've been speaking about today, so who the user is, where they're from, what goals have they triggered, what forms have they completed, what goals have they actioned, and so on, we can share all that with our CRM data. So we can enrich those profiles within Salesforce, and we can tell salespeople when they look at those profiles, did you know that your customer's been on the site and they've been looking at this particular service and they've been looking at it 3 or 4 times and they've scored this much, therefore give them a call. I'm not going to talk too much about this on this webinar, but we can also shunt information back the other way as well. So if we know that a user, for example, has downloaded a white paper, it's gone into Salesforce as a lead, we've given them a call, we've identified that they're a really hot prospect but they're not quite ready to buy. Again, we can tell that to Sitecore, and then we can have custom CRM rules running in Sitecore that will then promote sort of call to action content to that user the next time they come back to the site. So we can be quite clever about this, but ultimately it's about data sharing. We can enrich profiles on both sides of the equation. And just another sort of view of this, if you look on the left, this is an example of the experience profile in Sitecore. It's a little bit small on this slide, but you can see on the left probably a couple of graphs there. Personas, so we've got a graph based on interest type, based on the kind of content the user's consuming. We've got persona tags in here, so family user, automotive user, and a bunch of other things we're capturing about them. And on the right hand side you can see a Salesforce screen, and we can start to push all this information over into there. And just finally, I wanted to talk about delivering data in a useful format. Some of you may have had a look at Sitecore's analytics engine, and you may have heard us talking about it as well. It's not particularly complex. It doesn't give you particularly deep levels of data at the moment. They have improved it massively, but it's still quite light in terms of the depth of information it provides. The other factor here is that salespeople don't tend to have access to Sitecore, nor do they want it, nor should they really have to have it. And sometimes you've got CRMs in place and they're not being used either, and that's the case in about 75% of our customer base, is that they've got CRMs but no one's using it, or it's not being used properly. So actually, as a phase one, or until we can sort that piece of the puzzle out, how can we get information to sales teams in a way that they want to consume it? And this is an example, we've actually just rebranded it with Ratio. This is an example of a real client report that we pulled out a while back. This is looking at a list of users. It's looking at who's been visiting the site, what dates they visited, and the value that's been generated. So the value on the right hand side is the lead score. So the value being the cumulative total of the goals and events that the user has triggered throughout their visit. So we can provide that to the sales team in a spreadsheet that they can dynamically update. But we can also potentially look at firing out alerts as well. So we can have a look at sending them each week a list of who's been onto the site, what date did they visit, what was the lead score, and what goals particularly did they click on. And we can be quite granular about this. So we can add things like, what city were they in? We can add the email address if we know who the user is. We can add the first name, last name. We do a whole bunch of things with this. It's all sat in Sitecore. But crucially, it's how we extract it and having a schema for that. And what we often find is that you iteratively develop this. So as you give this to the sales team, you start feeding them this. They then start seeing the value of digital and what it's bringing to the business, and it gets them more engaged in the conversation about how we can better sell to them, and not just to prospects, but to existing customers, and how we can make their jobs just a little bit easier as well. So that was a very sort of quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things that you might want to look at doing within Sitecore to power your B2B marketing strategy. I think we've got a bit of time for a few questions. I think my colleague Mario is going to have a look and see if there's any. And also, if you've got anything you want to follow up on, then please send me an email. My email address is on the slide in front of you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that presentation. Yes, we've got some questions coming in. If you'd like to ask a question, just input your question into the toolbar on the right-hand side of the screen. If we don't manage to get back to you or answer the question today, we'll get back to you the next day or so with a detailed answer. So the first question, we don't use Sitecore for all of our marketing, so we use other technologies, and one of the things we use is Eloqua for email marketing. What implication does that have on this sort of approach?
Yes, so you can tie up Sitecore and platforms like Eloqua to create a single journey, or a unified journey is probably a better expression for it. So a lot of customers do have Eloqua. They have things like Marketo in place as well. Those are the two we probably most often come across. There's others out there as well, obviously. And they're using Eloqua in that example to manage automation. So they're just firing out emails, using it really as an email platform. They might be doing some very, very simple automation around it. But really, it's not that much more advanced than Batch and Blast from any other email platform. And the difficulty is that you've got very limited vision or view of what's actually happening within Sitecore off the back of those emails. So if we're sending out an email campaign or a nurture email from Eloqua, we want to see actually what value is that generating for us in Sitecore, and that's where we lose track at the moment. What we can do though is we can use things like campaign codes within Sitecore to track who's coming in from those email links within Eloqua, and we can start to measure then how much value those links are generating. So we can set up a variety of campaign codes for nurture email 1, nurture email 2, nurture email 3, and so on, and we can start to measure the effectiveness of each of those different emails. So it's really about, you can use whichever technologies you like, and most customers do. It's about how you link it up and make sure that you're capturing the data you need, and you've got those that journey linked up. A little bit of work to do that, but it's more in the planning than the execution. Execution isn't actually that difficult.
Okay, thank you, Steve. This one's actually quite a quick question. You mentioned List Manager. Where is that located within Sitecore?
So there's two things here. List Manager is a slightly different tool that sits alone. It's a tool within the dashboard in Sitecore. And List Manager is used, well, I think the intention originally was it's supposed to be used to create lists within Sitecore that's for email purposes. We find it better to actually use personalization lists to do the sort of things that we're talking about in the webinar today. And those can be found in the content editor underneath system. I think it's system, I can't remember if it's settings or not, but it's one of the, it's system settings or system, and then it's underneath marketing control panel, and it's underneath personalization, and then you've got predefined rules within there. So that's where it sits. If you didn't catch all that, just send me an email and I'll ping the details over to you. Okay,
all right. Another question. What integration are you using for the Salesforce? Are you using, I think this is an Australian company, the Fuse IT module, for example?
No. Most of the integrations, well, actually, to be honest, most of the integrations that we've come across so far have already been in place. You'll find that most customers don't use the Microsoft Dynamics connector. It's only really used for doing web forms for marketers, email capture. Salesforce, the Fuse IT Salesforce integration, I've never actually personally come across myself. Again, it's all been bespoke integrated, but it's much more complex than the out-of-the-box Dynamics connector with Sitecore, and I've heard good things about it. I've not heard anything bad said about it, put it that way. So there's a licensing cost there, but it saves quite a bit of time because it's able to map fields within XDB in Sitecore to fields within Salesforce as well. So it's definitely worth looking at. I think Terry Humphries and the guys at Fuse IT can help you with that if you want to have a chat with them.
Okay, all right. I've had a question come in for around Sitecore licensing costs, so I'm not sure whether it's the right forum, but I'll let you know the question. Is there an idea of what the entry-level cost is for Sitecore as a system?
For a base license?
Yes, correct. Correct.
Off the top of my head, I think it starts at around 18 for an entry-level sort of single server, and it goes up to pretty much as much as you want to spend, about 50 grand for a mid-level, enterprise, 1,000 and above. I think they've also got consumption pricing coming in as well, so that's based on, I think, the number of sessions you have on your site every year. I think they've just introduced that.
Okay, all right. We've got time for one.
I don't know the pricing around it at the moment.
Plus, I think the Sitecore's pricing may change after the 1st of July. So again, there's something to confirm with the vendor themselves. But we can connect you with the right person afterwards if that's a requirement. One last question, Steve. How do you know a customer's IP range?
So it's done by the GeoIP service. So it plugs. It's called Sitecore's geolocation service. It's actually plugged into the old system which they used to use openly, which is called MaxMind. So MaxMind has a database basically of all the known registered IP addresses of businesses, generally for sort of mid to larger businesses where they've got things like fixed lines and so on. So it just references that, and if it identifies, reverse lookup the IP address and it can match the company to it, it'll report that back into the Experience database.
Okay, cool. Right. Thank you very much, Steve. We don't have time for any more questions. If we didn't manage to answer your questions, we'll get back to you after today's webinar with an answer. Just leaves me to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us. Today's session was recorded, and we will send you a recording in the next day or so. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.